Yellowstone National Park is in the news again. If you've been living under a rock, a swarm of earthquakes has been happening there, hundreds of them. Is this just a normal thing that happens? Should we be worried? And why should you care? It turns out that there's actually a lot more going on here than just an increase in earthquake activity. Let's see what's up with the Yellowstone quakes. I am not a seismologist. In fact, if I was ever going to be a volcanologist or a seismologist, I think I'd choose volcanologist because I don't really like roller coasters, and that seems like it would be a little bit more exciting than studying earthquakes. But despite the fact that I have no formal training in seismology, somehow I got roped into talking about it. So let me start off by saying that when I talk about earthquakes, I will admit I am a little bit of a layman. So in order to understand what's going on with this earthquake swarm at Yellowstone, let's start with some basics. The Earth is constantly rumbling. There's a lot of energy moving through the planet all the time in the form of seismic waves. When those seismic waves are released in a sudden burst, they radiate outward from their source in the form of an earthquake. Earthquakes happen all over the world, and most of them aren't very big or very deep. The vast majority of earthquakes occur along tectonic plate boundaries. The plates that make up the Earth's crust are always moving and grinding against each other. And where they meet, they can get kind of stuck. And then when they get unstuck, that releases a bunch of energy in the form of seismic waves. Those waves radiate out from the point where the rocks slipped past each other, called the focus or the hypocenter, and they travel through the Earth. As the waves move through different materials, they reflect and refract, and some get scattered. All of this causes the surface of the Earth to rumble and shake. The point on the surface directly above the focus is called the epicenter. And depending on the strength and depth of the earthquake, the shaking can be enough to damage buildings, disrupt transportation systems, even change the shape of the land. Earthquakes are measured using something called the Richter scale. The Richter scale is a base 10 logarithmic scale, which means that each whole number on the scale represents a 10 times greater amplitude of seismic waves than the previous number. For example, a magnitude 3 earthquake is 10 times stronger than a magnitude 2 earthquake and 100 times stronger than a magnitude 1 earthquake. A magnitude 7 earthquake is 10 times stronger than a magnitude 6 earthquake and 100 times stronger than a magnitude 5 earthquake. Now there are other scales that are used for measuring earthquakes as well, such as the moment magnitude scale, but the Richter scale is the one that most people are familiar with. Now if you're wondering how strong an earthquake it would take to actually cause serious damage, it depends. Most of the damage from earthquakes comes from the shaking that happens during the initial P wave, which is the first part of the earthquake. The duration of the shaking is usually less than a minute, but it can sometimes be longer. The strength of the shaking also depends on the distance from the epicenter and the depth of the earthquake. The closer you are to the epicenter and the shallower the earthquake is, the stronger the shaking will be. So how strong does an earthquake have to be to cause serious damage? Well, it depends. Generally speaking, you need an earthquake between a 6 and 7 on the Richter scale to cause major damage. Earthquakes below a 4 are generally too weak to cause any noticeable damage, although some exceptions do exist. With that in mind, let's get back to Yellowstone. So there's been an earthquake swarm happening in Yellowstone National Park. Technically, an earthquake swarm is just a sequence of earthquakes that happen in the same place over a relatively short period of time. Usually, most of these earthquakes are pretty small. However, in March 2023, the United States Geological Survey started to notice an increase in seismic activity near Yellowstone's supervolcano caldera. Since March, the USGS has recorded nearly 2,000 earthquakes in the area. The swarm started fairly abruptly and is still ongoing as of the writing of this video. Luckily, none of the earthquakes have been particularly large. The largest so far has been a magnitude 4.8 earthquake that struck on June. Although a magnitude 4.8 earthquake doesn't sound very big, it was the biggest earthquake to hit the area since scientists began monitoring seismic activity there in the 1980s. In addition, it was felt as far away as Idaho Falls, Idaho, and West Yellowstone, Montana, and people even reported feeling it as far away as Jackson, Wyoming, which is about 300 kilometers from the epicenter. Despite the size of the earthquake, there were no reports of damage. But it's just worth noting that about half of the homes in the nearby town of West Yellowstone are vacation rentals, so nobody was home anyway. Now, if you're paying attention, you might have noticed me carefully using the word earthquake swarm instead of just saying there's been a bunch of earthquakes. That's because there are some key differences between an earthquake swarm and a set of individual earthquakes. An earthquake swarm is a set of earthquakes that happen in the same place over a relatively short period of time, but they're not necessarily related. That is, they don't all come from the same source. Instead, they may all be related to the movement of magma beneath the surface. Magma is molten rock that's found beneath the Earth's crust. When magma moves around, it can cause the surrounding rocks to crack and shift, which generates seismic waves. This is why magma chambers are often called magma oceans. There's always a lot of movement going on down there. Now, the movement of magma isn't always easy. Sometimes it gets stuck and that causes stress to build up in the rocks around it. When the stress exceeds the strength of the rocks break and that releases the built-up pressure. But the magma chamber isn't done. Once that pressure is relieved, the magma can continue to move into the newly created space, which generates new seismic waves. This cycle of magma intrusion, stress buildup, and release can continue over and over again, generating a swarm of earthquakes. So is this what's happening at Yellowstone? Well, maybe. It's just hard to say exactly what's going on beneath the surface of the Earth without direct evidence. But based on the location of the earthquakes and the chemistry of the gases that have been seeping out of the ground in the area, scientists think that magma is moving toward the surface. Magma is less dense than the surrounding solid rock, so it tends to rise toward the surface. As it rises, it creates a lot of gas pressure, which causes gases like steam and carbon dioxide to bubble out of the ground. Now, it turns out that the location of this earthquake swarm is very close to the location of the supervolcano caldera. In fact, the epicenters of some of the earthquakes lie directly beneath the center of the caldera. So what does this mean? Should we be worried that Yellowstone is about to blow? Well, maybe. It's impossible to predict with certainty whether or not a supervolcano will erupt. But there are some things that scientists can look for that might indicate that an eruption is imminent. For example, changes in the frequency, location, and size of earthquakes can be an early warning sign of an impending eruption. Scientists at the USGS are continuing to monitor the situation closely. They're recording the location, depth, and magnitude of every earthquake that occurs in the area. They're also monitoring the chemistry of the gases that are being released from the ground and the temperature of the ground itself. So far, there's no evidence that the swarm is getting bigger or that the magma is getting any closer to the surface. However, it's still too early to say whether or not this is just a small blip in seismic activity or the start of something bigger. Yellowstone supervolcano is one of the largest and most dangerous volcanoes in the world. Its last eruption was 640,000 years ago and it's overdue for another one. Scientists estimate that there's a 1 in 730 chance that it could erupt in any given year. An eruption would be devastating to the surrounding area and could have global consequences. So it's important that we continue to monitor it closely. Who knows? Maybe someday soon we'll be able to predict when the next eruption will happen. But until then, we'll just have to wait and see. If you liked this video, please leave a like. If you disliked it, well, there's that other button. You can also leave a comment if you want. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. It's free and helps support the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.